Greetings, dear ones. I'm Cryon of Magnetic Service. For those listening and not here, we are in the UK at a node called Glastonbury and a pineal choir called the Avalon Choir. Now, for those of you who are here, there will be 8 short messages today. I wish to talk about the creation story once again. I wish to talk about Glastonbury. I wish to talk about the grids here. I wish to talk about a matching null that is here, matched to someplace that is not. I wish to talk about the Pleiadian story. I wish to do all of this before you have a break. And when you come back, I wish to talk about the mother energy. I wish to talk about Yah-E. I'll give him some instructions. Dear ones, again, for those who have not heard this, the story is amazing, unbelievable, and to some, they will say it's impossible. In fact, they will categorize you and anyone else who talks about this in this way. I want to talk about the miracle that took place approximately 200,000 years ago that set the stage for everything you see right here in your chair. You came from the stars. Can I say it any more clearly? But what else would you expect a channeler to say? You came from the stars. And against all odds of all of the other stories from all of the other sacred places you might go, you came from the stars. And it was the Pleiadian who came and actually changed your biological blueprint, that which is your DNA. This Pleiadian, stop calling him an ET, her an ET. They are the superhumans. They are human, just like you. From across the galaxy in the Seven Sisters, they came on purpose to seed this planet with sacredness. If they had not come, dear ones, you would simply be another mammal. You would never seek for that which is the Creator. It would not occur to you. As high as your civilization would go, as high as the technology would go, you'd never seek the Creator. That comes from the seed inside, which looks for those things which you cannot explain, which is created all over the planet, the seeking for God. And that was the Pleiadian role, but in the process, the first 100,000 years, they set the stage. They created the nodes and the nulls, which we will discuss. They created the grids of the planet, which we will discuss. And at the same time, they were changing your DNA. Some will say, well, this is what is responsible for you having 23 pair of chromosomes instead of 24. That's not exactly right. Yes, you have 23 in that which you can observe in the microscope. But dear ones, the Pleiadians would never take away base 12. You have 24. But the 24th is a multidimensional one that is representation of all that which is your Akash and your soul and your higher self and the avenue of prayer. It's the avenue of the pineal. It's all of that which allows you to communicate as you're doing today. That's the 24th one. You're different. You're different from any mammal below you. And science has seen this. You're different in so many other ways, with only one kind of human being instead of a variety and variety and variety. Science does not understand why there's only one kind of human, why you changed 200,000 years ago. But I'm here to tell you, it was from the stars. The prophecies tell the story. The test is of energy. There were 4 civilizations before yours. They were all small, and they didn't make it. They destroyed themselves. They created their own plagues. Some of them were greedy, even though they were so small. You were the 5th. And the prophecy said that if you would make it past the precession of the equinoxes, you would see the beginning of something special. Light. You'd be shown things that you'd never been shown before. All things would begin to change past 2012. And you sang about it December 21st, 2012, and opened the gates and sent the signal. Have you told anybody what you're doing today? Perhaps you've told your relatives or your friends, well, I'm on my way to the UK for a choir performance. And they said, you're kidding, I didn't know you could sing. And you say, well, it's a little different. There's a lot of us there, and we all sound great together. And we have 2 days of intense rehearsals and a little dancing. And then a grand performance day. And your friends would say, that's exciting. I would love to tell my friends in the UK, and can they buy a ticket? Can they get into this show? And you say, well, there's no real tickets because there's no audience. And you would say, well, you see, we sing for ourselves. Let me get this straight. You rehearse for 2 days, you have a performance day, you dress up and you sing for yourself. And you say, well, not exactly. We also sing for the Pleiadians and the Seven Sisters. And your friends grow quiet. And they slowly walk away. I'm going to finish this short message. 40,000 years ago, there is a civilization on this planet called the Aborigine. They meet all of the attributes and the key points of a civilization, all of them. They've been here for 40,000 years, and if you ask them how they got here, they'll tell you about the landings of the Pleiadians. They'll tell you where they went, how long they lasted. They will tell you they are there even today. Through a 3,000-mile secret song line, they will unveil a story that is identical to what I just told you. This is not sequestered to a few people that you would call lunatic fringe. This is a worldwide event with thousands who know of the truth of this. It's your modern culture that often gets in the way of the truth, in the way of the Gaia energy. But you're here today to send a signal to those who set the stage. I'll be back. Dear ones, we continue. The story of what the Pleiadians did on this planet is remarkable. Some of it is known, some of it is unknown, some of it will be revealed. But everything they did was in sacredness for you. These superhumans, what made them super was that they contained that which is an ascension status, meaning that on their planets, they had very high consciousness and had evolved within their higher selves. They were a multidimensional consciousness packet, you might say, and came to this planet in order to seed it to give you the same thing. This is the Adam and Eve story, slightly different. And what they did, besides simply to alter you as humans, to get you on the track of sacredness, of understanding light and dark with free choice, what they did first was to align this planet in a way that is for you. They set systems in place And part of the systems that they did, we have told you about. But one of them, spectacular, they gave Gaia consciousness. You would walk outside in the forests and the beauty of the lakes and the streams and the oceans and think, well, it's always been this way, the feeling that I have. No, it hasn't. That feeling you have, tree hugger, was given by the Pleiadians. This is Gaia consciousness. It talked to the ancestors and gave them information. It fed you, gave you water. It is aligned with humanity. It is for humanity. The Gaia consciousness, dear ones, the whole part of you is missing today, if you've noticed, in most of the belief systems of the planet, except the ancients. We've told you before, it's time to return to an acknowledgement that the earth is part of the divinity of you, is a cooperative entity of you, and works side by side with you. Profound it is that it has actually aligned itself magnetically for this time. Profound it is that you're going through weather shifts for this time. Profound it is that Gaia knows about the shift and is on board with everything you're doing. How sad it is that it is so apart from understanding on this planet of who it is. That will change. That will change as you review the ancestors and some of their knowledge and their beliefs and realize just how profound and accurate they were. All of the tones that you sing are part of the alignment of not only the stars, but of human consciousness, because it affects the nodes and the nulls. I'll tell you about that in a moment. The second grid which was placed here is called the crystalline grid. The crystalline grid is invisible. It is a multidimensional grid that remembers human action, and its crystalline is a metaphor, because you know that crystalline is a stone, a substance, an element, anything you want to call it, for it's all of those, that remembers, that holds frequency. Perhaps the crystalline, even multidimensional, that remains to be discovered. But the crystalline grid then is a metaphor for a remembering grid. And this particular grid is not uniform on the planet any more than the magnetic grid is. The magnetic grid was moved just for you in the 80s. And we told you that, to allow for higher consciousness, even to allow for the tones to get through to where they're going. It had to be this way, a full alignment that the Pleiadians set up. We're going to talk about the crystalline grid in a moment. The nodes and the nulls are recent. They're only 7 years old in your knowledge. They're 200,000 years old in actuality. They were placed here in case you made it. And you did. I want you to understand, I brought in the knowledge of the nodes and the nulls on or around 2012. It was part of what I am here for. That was a revealed secret that the Pleiadians put here for you. There are others, and when you get to that place in human consciousness, they will be revealed. But the nodes and the nulls are so important. You started with one in Lemuria. It was already matched. There were 2 that are already matched, and the rest of them match up as you need them to with human consciousness of the day. And I've given them to you one by one and explained why they match, and I'm going to do that in a moment. The nodes and the nulls, you might say, were put here for an accelerated consciousness. You have now passed this marker, sent the signal, and human consciousness begins to shift. But it doesn't shift like it used to very, very slowly. It shifts quickly, if any of you have noticed. In the news, for instance, and the things that are happening, and the yin and the yang, and the back and the forth, and the good and the bad, and you don't know where you are, do you? The nodes and the nulls are fully responsible. They push and pull. You might say they're good at pushing in that which is dramatically good and pulling out that which is old and not so good. And that is needed for this. Activated, they are time capsules. They don't contain anything. How about that for a time capsule? What they contain is a system, a process, an engine. And when it was time, they opened. You are on one, and I'll tell you in a moment the difference between this one, which is Glastonbury. You've been to so many. You've been to Lemuria, you've been to Shasta, you've been to Uluru, and now here you are in Glastonbury. What makes this different? Why is this node different? To be continued. Dear ones, this is the third short message. And we continue with the story of the grids. Every single grid that was placed upon this planet is dynamic. And what I mean by that is that none of them are static. They're not the same from one place to the other. And the classic one is magnetics. Magnetics is constantly dynamic. Even on a static magnet, you might hold in your hand, you would say, well, it doesn't change. The polarity is the polarity. Nothing moves. Imagine if you were a microscopic animal on that magnet, crawling around on it. Would you feel different if you were on the positive node as opposed to the negative? And the answer is yes. Magnetics interfaces with consciousness and biology. It's different in different places of the planet. Scientists know this simply by measuring the strengths. And that is not all. Because the magnetic grid interfaces with other grids created by the Pleiadians, you get anomalies. The crystalline grid is not static either. First of all, I told you that it responds to and remembers human action. The teaching goes like this. Have you ever been into an ancient battlefield? And the sensitive ones here have felt something. The question is, where did the something come from? And you would say, well, it's the energy of what happened here. And then we say, what is the mechanics of you feeling the energy of the graveyard or of the battlefield or of any other place where things happened that were dramatic with humans? And the answer is the crystalline grid. It sits there and remembers things and then produces them, playing them back, if you wish to say, to a sensitive. And this grid, this crystalline grid, is not static either. There are times and places where it is more powerful and less powerful. Now, you heard that right. There are times and places. Would you be shocked to know that even the crystalline grid is variable according to the seasons and the alignments of the planets? All these grids move around energetically and interface at different times and places. Now add the Gaia grid that we spoke of, the actual energy of the earth. There are places where it's stronger, dear ones, where you will feel a far greater impact of the love of Gaia than in other places. Most of you haven't been to the North Pole. It's not very good there. The magnetics, not very good there. The crystalline grid, there's nothing to remember there. That's an example. It's not the same wherever you go. A while back, I told you of something near here that now is understood by those who wish to believe in these things. I told you that there was an anomaly that is close to and exists in parts of what you now call Ireland. And the anomalies are much like the same ones that occur in the Bermuda Triangle. That there is an overlap that voids out certain grids. One of them that is completely voided out was the crystalline. The Gaia grid is also missing to some degree. And the result is that in this anomalous place, it's free to let you see and feel things that other places would never allow you to see or feel. The tradition for hundreds of years of the fairies, the little people, the multidimensional forms, the devas in the forest, has existed so long, hundreds of years, known and acknowledged at some degree by the ancients and even the modern government there, who still won't touch a fairy tree. Dear ones, that is because of the grid's anomaly in that area. Would you find it interesting to know that you have just the opposite in Glastonbury? That the crystalline grid, to make up for the one close to here that has nothing, here is double or triple any place on the planet. Now, if it's true that the crystalline is hooked to human consciousness, that would mean that here and close to here, perhaps the whole island, would amplify consciousness. Oh, it does. And what does an amplified consciousness mean? It means everybody wants to be here. It means that it's famous for some things. It means that the consciousness that is in every single human, the desires, the hero's journey, that which you want so badly, is here. More than that, it's been enhanced. Don't you find it interesting that there are very few places on the planet that have romanticized their battles like here? And that means there's a crystalline grid here that goes for the light, that goes for that which is what humans want, what they accelerate. You sit in a very, very special grid, dear ones. More powerful is it than any other node on the planet, except Lemuria. And that is why, because this node sits right in the middle of a very amplified crystalline grid. Now, I want you to remember something. The grids and the nodes were here long before the legends. The grids and the nodes were here long before the countries had names. And yet this is where you come to hear the stories, to sit at the feet of the poets, to listen to the music and imagine what might have happened here. What might have happened here? Was there a sword? Was there a king? To be continued. And this is the fourth message. The 4 in Tibetan numerology is a Gaia number. Let this not be lost on any of you with the subject at hand. It truly is all about Gaia, all about the grids that interface with Gaia. How shall I begin this? Let's begin again with the superhuman, the Pleiadian. If there had to be a prime directive installed into DNA, if such a thing were possible, it wouldn't be that you have free choice. This is not the prime directive. Free choice is an ability. What would be the original seed thought? What would be at the center of the teaching wheel that the Pleiadians would want all humans to remember for the total duration of humanity on this planet? What would it be? I'll tell you that you are born magnificent. It's you're connected to the creative source. That is the prime directive. And through the ages, dear ones, no matter what humanity has done, no matter where consciousness goes by itself with free choice, the prime directive is still there. You're magnificent. You can do anything. You can connect with that which is the source of creation and build a planet that is of light, if you want to. Now, what has that got to do with Glastonbury? Everything. Because in this place, what is the strongest is that grid that amplifies the prime directive, the hero's journey. We have said this so many times. This hero is the prime directive. You know who you are. Every woman, every man has the fantasies of being the hero, of having the respect, of conquering the foe, of standing tall. You think that was an accident. That's not human nature, dear ones. That's from the superhuman, who has given you that spark of knowledge that you were born on this planet magnificent. And so the magnificence of the story is enhanced and enhanced and enhanced. Since my partner brought me to this land called Europe, a few weeks ago, I have given 30 channels. The last 16 contain this story. It's there for you to hear if you wish to review, and I'm not going to review all of it. But I talked about that which is the cup, that which you call the Grail. I've talked of that. I talked about the supper in the upper room. I talked about Jesus. Let's continue that for a moment. I want you to know that there's a beautiful history that seems to be untold. Did Jesus come here? Absolutely, he wouldn't have missed this. You call it the missing years of Jesus. They weren't missing, they're just boring. All you remember is 2 elements. Pretty good ones. Birth and death, that's it. And everything in between, who knows? Actually, it is well documented. It's in the scrolls. And it's not written in your scriptures. You can decide why when you read it. But he came here, and I said he came here with his uncle Joseph. He came here 3 times. In another reality, dear ones, in another truth, in another dimension, dear ones, this is where he wanted to live. Away from the Romans, if he could. Yeah, they came here too. He loved it here. Why would the master of love be so attractive to this place to come repeatedly? Under the guise of wanting to trade and be in the business of trade with his uncle Joseph, the substance being tin importation to Palestine. He felt a love here. He felt the hero's journey here. Long before he realized what his own journey might be, long before any supper in the upper room, he was here. It lends to the mystique of all that is in the legends that circulate here. Let's begin. Poetry was the way of communication of adventures in older times. Unlike the novels you have today, poetry is what contained the greatest adventures of mankind. And the one in this civilization that you remember the most would have come from Homer. And if you start to analyze the story of Jason, you see the elements of the hero's journey. One human being, man or woman, must conquer supernatural foes in order to save that which is their reality. And on the journey, they collect that which is their friends, their associates, those of like mind, those who want to be with them for the same reasons. And on their journey, they encounter things that will test their duality and their strength. And they always have a wizard. Everyone. Now, the wizard always represents the magic of magnificence. Every single human in every single magic story that's ever been told on this planet that has lasted and lasted and lasted as a wizard. You start to update that. And you think about the story or stories or multiples of the legend of Arthur. And of course, in this legend, he has the same thing. He must conquer supernatural foes, test his duality, bring along those of like mind, call them what you want. And he had a really good wizard. Leaping forward closer to your age, you have the Lord of the Rings. And in this story, which wasn't always a trilogy, in this story, you have Frodo out to conquer supernatural forces with his friends who are only this high. There was a sword and a wizard. What happened to Luke Skywalker? His wizard was about this high. He was out to conquer supernatural forces with his friends, with his wizard. The little boy with the glasses and the wand, out to conquer supernatural forces with his friends and a wizard. Dear ones, this is the hero's journey. It's magnificent. It slays the dragons of duality. It illuminates the lights in the human soul, and it brings you to a place you wouldn't have been before because of the magnificence. Arthur is real in the hearts of all who read the story. There are too many Arthurs for him to be an actual human being on the planet. He would have had to have been 400 years old. Too many of them. And yet he was real. In that he lives in the magnificence of all of you. And this land is renowned for the legends of heroism. I stood in a place much like this, and I reminded those listening of something. The hero's journey was actually acted out physically here. And one of the reasons the Battle of Britain was won against all odds was that the crystalline grid amplifies heroes here. It vilifies the villains and amplifies heroes, and there was no question of those who lived here in those times that they could raise up because they were born magnificent. And they would conquer the evil one across the way, and they did. And they did. In this land. And that's not a legend. Do you see where I'm going with this? Dear ones, I wish to match up a null. And I want you to do some homework when I do. It's in Greenland. And the node is Glenbjorn Field. Now, Greenland was not always Greenland. Greenland was not Greenland when the nodes and the knolls were put there. It was simply land. So don't be surprised if I tell you that the area of the knoll includes Iceland. If you take a look and go to Greenland, I will tell you, if you've ever been there, some of you have been there, isn't it interesting? Felt a little like New Zealand, didn't it? Felt a little like here, didn't it? You were amplified, weren't you? There's something about it, isn't there? The crystalline grid is almost identical. Are there legends there? Oh, yes, there are. There was a Welsh poet, and in this poetry, he talked about a man with a sword, Arthur. In his own area, called Stirlingshire, there's a place called Camelon. If you go to Greenland, you'll find this. For the Welshmen, his writings also went there. They were prolific poets. They understood. They had their legends. Dear ones, go find them. You'll find that they're very similar to this. That's the pair that gets matched up today. And we'll get off the stage now, but not before my partner tells his joke. He must tell his joke. In the last tone set, the people who live here from Wales were very happy. Greetings, dear ones. This is message number 5. Now we bring this entire message and groups of messages closer to home, the home of Yayi. I want to talk to you about Lemuria. For those who have not heard this and may wonder about the actuality of the legend of Lemuria, of the small continent of Mu. We've explained it and explained it. Just suffice to say that there was no missing continent. It was the Hawaiian Islands pushed up by the magma of the hot spot for thousands of years, which became a mountain in itself, one of the highest on the planet, and then subsided. These were the same mechanics that happened millions of years ago, the place you call Yellowstone. But this was a node, an important node, and Lemuria was the home of the superhumans, one of many nodes that they produced and stayed in and taught at. But this one was special because it was isolated, and literally for thousands of years, humans would come and go in the teaching without interference from anywhere else. So it had the purest teaching for the longest time. And eventually, as you know, and even as you celebrate today, the corporealness of the superhuman women would be transformed into what we call a consciousness package. More on that in a moment. What we have told you about Yah-weh is this, is that he was a Lemurian priest. He was the son of a Pleiadian mother. His father was human. And that, dear ones, is the scenario for all. Part of the seeding process was that the mother carried the change, and that over a period of time, the DNA would then morph and become what you have today. It took thousands of years before Lemuria became Lemuria. But when it began, and as it developed, there were a few human beings who were selected to remain longer. For they were tasked to do specific kinds of things which would then reside in their Akash, so that when they reincarnated over and over and over into a time of the precession of the equinoxes, 2012, that they would then awaken with that knowledge in case it was needed. You did awaken. It is needed. And this explains the tones. I said to so many of you that Yah-weh has shockingly accurate memory of the tones. Well, there's a little more to that, which I'm going to reveal. You have heard perhaps about the temple of rejuvenation. That's accurate. It's called the temple of rejuvenation. Even in the Lemurian languages and those that followed, it was interpreted as the temple of rejuvenation. Now, Yah-weh did high science there. Let me talk about the temple, but first let me talk about his family. Yah-weh had a sister. The sister was from the same Pleiadian mother. The sister is Melihah. Todd had a half-brother, not from the same Pleiadian mother, but from the same father. And that was the extent of his closest family. Both Todd and his sister lived on Lemuria for a long time, many of the lifetimes of regular humans they lived. He, his sister, and his half-brother regularly visited the temple and were rejuvenated so they could last a long time. Now, there is purpose in all of this, and it's part of the Pleiadian plan, and it all circles around today. For his family, physically, is here in the room. Melihah is Dr. Amber Wolf. His half-brother stands before you at the microphone. All in case there was a time when you went past the precession and decided not to war, to have a higher consciousness, so that these three put together on purpose would carry their tasks as you see them now. Melihah was tasked as a shaman, and the shaman would be that which was the women of the land. Women were the shamans. They were the shamans because they were the teachers of divinity, of the teaching wheel, because they had the compassion, they had the equipment, which is to raise the intuition, the children, all of these things. It only makes sense that the women would be the ones then to teach the divinity. We said in the sisterhood meeting, there was no competition. The men did not want to be what the women were. They were so appreciative of the roles they all played, which helped in life. They didn't covet the other one's responsibilities any more than the men wanted a chance at childbirth. And we've said that many times. It is not what it is today in a society that competes and wants all to be the same and all equal. Back then, it was balanced and correct. And the women were the shamans. And so she was tasked with remembering the shamanic teaching. Todd, he was being groomed for something else. Two elements you should know. The first is this. By living longer, by operating the temple of rejuvenation, inside him was being placed over and over the knowledge of DNA. How it worked. What happened with the rejuvenation. All of these things back then were being repeated and repeated and repeated, but that's not all. Why would a scientific place that rejuvenates life be a temple? Are you going to go up and worship Todd? No. Is Yah-E at the center of it? Not really. The temple was built by the Pleiadians. There have been many in the last years, through their intuition and their akash, who would draw the temple of rejuvenation. Some very specifically, some with remembrance they claimed was perfect. Not one of them was perfect, but one was very close. And when you see it, even the first ones, you see that there is no way that they could ever have built such a thing in Lemuria with a starting civilization on the islands. They didn't even have the materials. It was built by the Pleiadians, designed by the Pleiadians. And in this place is where they worshiped. Do you really think that a graduate race connected to the divinity would not have their places where they would sing? That they were in the right place at the right time doing the right thing and seen as good by the Creator, in touch so greatly with that higher self that they carried to us and gave to us, those star mothers, those superhumans. They got together and sang, and what do you think they sang? The tones. Over and over and over. And guess who was living there? Yah-E. You got to hear him over and over and over. No other human has heard the majesty of this. No other human carries with them the songs of the stars. So his remembrance of these things, which he now gives to you, was implanted over lifetimes and lifetimes. When he was there on the top of that mountain doing the science, we've told you it's cold up there. That allowed the science to be done. There's plenty of heat up there for him because he's sitting on a volcano. And there were rocks, when cracked and heated, which would give oxygen. He had everything he needed. He did not come down the mountain. Water from rain, food. His half-brother brought it up the mountain regularly. I stand here today telling you that his half-brother still wonders why he had to deliver food all the time to his half-brother. He doesn't like to be cold. That's the story I wanted you to hear, and that is why Yah-weh knows what he knows and remembers what he remembers. A temple built by the star people, the mothers, beautiful in its architecture, reflecting what they were used to worshiping. It was a temple that also did rejuvenation. That fills in some of the pieces as you get closer to a greater truth of what you're really doing. There's more. Because in the next section, we'll talk about his mother. Message number 6. In Tibetan numerology, the 6th is perfection and harmony. We speak about the Pleiadians and what they did on earth in general. We've never really talked about what they did day by day or how they felt about being here. I want you to remember this superhuman is super because they are connected with a central source. They are so connected, dear ones, that in history, some of them were mistaken as angels. It's actually amusing to see in some of your scriptures what the angels said, knowing very well they were the star mothers. That is how ascended they were. Can you imagine, for a moment, leaving their homes, knowing that they would come to this planet and exist here and never go back? One of the reasons for the Temple of Rejuvenation was it reminded them of home with their architecture and all the things they did. They couldn't do that on the other nodes and the other places that they came, similar to Lemuria, where they knew there would be no others invading the lands or asking what was there. And they put it on the mountaintop so high that regular humans would not visit, so they could be alone. Dear ones, their commitment was to you, and it still is. The human body, even the superhuman body, has limits. And you might think that a Pleiadian, with all that they are interdimensionally, could sustain biology literally forever, and they can't. There is a limit to the corporeal connectedness, even for a Pleiadian. And they stretched that limit and stretched it. And they lived thousands of years. But there had to come a time when they said goodbye. The last time in the last choir, I asked Yah-weh to remember a farewell song, the tones that were sung. Now, Yah-weh, you went and changed that to another kind of a song. Like you had free choice. But intuitively, you changed it correctly. And that's what I want to talk about. The tones that were sung over and over, the first set of 24, 12 sets, were a lot easier for you, and the ones that followed were a little more difficult because you didn't hear them that often. And then the ones who followed that, you had to get help from the ancestors and others. Still, that in your kosh you pulled out. But this one, it was only sung one time. One time. It's the same one that she sang to your sister. It's not a song of goodbye and farewell, and yet it is. Because there's nothing like having a mother for generations and generations of love. In human form, to touch and hold and feel and hear, sing. It's a song you're going to hear later of transformation, of ascension, where she went from a human body, very human, to encapsulated consciousness. This marked the end of Lemuria, where the teachers were not able to teach corporeally any longer, and they had to move to the other nodes. People have asked, why is it that they didn't stay in this, the original place of teaching? And the answer is some of them did, but dear ones, it sunk to a fraction of what it is. It didn't have the majesty and the energy that it did when it was Lemuria. Oh, it is still felt there, and you were there, many of you. But the task of the Pleiadian was to go to the other nodes where the most humanity would be. For they influence the teaching, and they would continue. How long is a Pleiadian life? And the answer is as long as they wish it to be. Some of them, including your mother, Todd, will remain on this planet indefinitely. They knew that. And death for a Pleiadian is not your kind of death. It's a transformation back to the central source, and they are conscious for it. Imagine conscious ascension, perhaps even like Elijah, where you remember and there really truly is no death. Someday. Where do you think your mother went, Yai? Think about it. Did she go to Shasta? Shasta would not see population for a very long time. She went to one of the centers of European population, which is today called Glastonbury. In a moment or two, you're going to sing a song, and you're going to represent that which is not farewell, but a transition. And now here you are with the choir singing her songs. And as you do, she arrives for you to meet your mother. She's still here. Honor the moment. Meliha, she's still here. Honor the moment. Is this too much for you to believe? Do you believe in angels? Do you believe in the divinity that created your very soul and your very being? It is possible. From Lemuria, she came to Glastonbury and waited until 2018 for this, the Eighth Choir. And this is number 7. These are instructions for the doctor. In the past, Yai, we've had you come and sit in a chair. It's not necessary. For you can glean these instructions along with the others. And it indeed involves another tone set. Always does. Let me back up. The tones that have been created for 6 years have been the tones that you've remembered in your Akash as we've described. It went on to the tones that you had to have help from, that you had heard but not that often. It has evolved to what you have in a lullaby, in a farewell. And now I wish to challenge you for something far simpler. But this one, although simple in its construction, will be more difficult to remember. Let me explain. Before the Pleiadians got here, dear ones, they had gone through what you are going through. Of all of the planets of free choice, those which represent the seven sisters probably had the most salted past. We told you in another channeling they had even gone through genocide. The darkest of the dark. Whatever you think has happened on this planet that is as ugly as you can imagine, they saw it even greater. And yet they pulled themselves through a civilization and made a decision, like you have. And those listening to this for the first time would say, what decision? I don't remember a vote. It was humanity all at once deciding to stop the cycle that would bring you war after war. The cycle that wouldn't even be smart enough to see the dysfunction in it because it never solved anything. A human race collectively that would say, we're tired of this, we wish to change the parameters. A humanity that would decide that history would no longer drive the future. That's what you're doing now. Indeed, you survived past that which was predicted you would not. Indeed, you went past that year 2000, which loosely was described as the Armageddon years, the time when war would finally take its toll and humanity would cease to exist as you know it today. You went through the 2012 shift where the calendars ended and the prophecies stood there and reminded you where you were going, into an abyss, really, where there was no prophecy, and there still isn't. You're in a time which no one predicted you'd be in. And you celebrated it esoterically with the tones. And those of you who believed that the Pleiadians were here got heard. It sailed through this galaxy, and many knew that this planet of free choice had made it just like the Pleiadians. They went through this, and then they started growing. I have told you, dear ones, there'll come a time when you can look back at these years and actually change your calendar yet again and start it over. And you will call the years before 2012 the barbaric era. This will be the age of compassion. And slowly, very slowly, you'll see humanity start to get together and agree that history and what happened in the past should not drive the future. Israelis and Palestinians will make that choice together with new leadership someday. When they'll literally have to swallow hard and they'll say, we know our history, we know who did what to whom, and we don't care. What we want is the future. We don't want to remember the past and blame and blame. We don't want the retribution that comes with what happened then. We want the future to be what we design it from now on. And that is what you're going to do. And that's what the Pleiadians did. That's what they did. Century after century passed, consciousness raised. They started to become multidimensional. The ones that seated them greeted them finally. We've talked about that. And they sang songs about it. They sang victory songs about it. On their planet, they had celebrations in that which was their annual, and they would get together and sing the song of victory. A simple one. A song of victory that they all knew, and it was victory over the duality of a barbaric era that they had gone through and passed. And they realized that all the souls that were part of the old were now also reincarnated in part of the new. They understand now and then and even before the system of God. Ya'i, your challenge is this. I want you to remember something you never heard. However, I told you your mother is here. Her Akash still remembers it. Every single Pleiadian knows this song backwards and forwards. Mom never left, and she will continue to share her Akash with you. You, the ancestors, the directors, can come up with this, and it'll probably be shockingly accurate. Let me tell you about this song of victory. For I'm going to do now something that I have never done before. I'm going to give you the attributes of the tones. For you are emulating something that is so profoundly Pleiadian, and they know the song. Like the others, there will be one tone sang against another. It's one pair, just one pair. Here is the challenge. Make it simple, like 17 and 24, so that there would be those who could sing it without ever being in the choir because they heard it once or twice. As simple as the ayo, as remembrance, as a ha-ha. Here are the attributes and the meanings. This is a song where duality meets oneness. It is the celebration of the conquering of duality into the oneness, the duality into the oneness, the duality into the oneness. It's a victory song over darkness, where duality starts not to exist anymore, but with free choice, it becomes one with everything. The attributes of the tones are these: two tones, simple, sung against one another, but in three places within the series of singing, you come to a true unison. Let me define unison. Unison is the same exact note in music, sung by both sides, also with the same identical sounds, both sides. It happens 3 times within the series, representing the duality coming to unity, the duality coming to unity, the duality coming to unity. And the last time that it comes to unity will be the end. I want you to remember the end of this song, because the end is heroic. It doesn't end softly, doctor. It ends with a shout of victory. In unison, same lyrics, same notes. The Pleiadians know it well. It is really there, stuck in your mom's Akash. She's here, celebrating who you have become, who your sister has become. She's here. for the next section so that she can be part of even that transition song that she sang to you one time. Imagine she is now part of something so long ago that you are celebrating about her. This song will come easier than you think. Heroic, simple, easy. And you never heard it. I'll be back. Dear ones, this is message 8. I'd like you all to close your eyes. I want you to envision something with me. I want you to vision nighttime in a giant stadium. And there's a hush in the crowd. The stadium is immense, huge. You cannot clearly see the participants, but the stadium is crowded. They seem to be in the dark, but you can see points of light in each of them, like they all held a match. Something very common in some of the concerts you have. Their matches are lit, points of light. Instead of thousands, there's tens of thousands. And in the middle of this stadium, in the very, very center, there is a spotlight that is as bright as it could be. And on the ground where the spotlight is illuminating, there's a rock with a sword in it. There's a hush. The cool night air is there. You can feel it. But there's no sound of wind. The rock and the sword, they've been there a long time. They've got names, these things. Through the legends of the earth, you've named all of the utensils. Almost like they had personalities, all of them. The rock has a name, and the name is darkness of the past. The sword has many names. For through the history of the planet and the culture upon culture, they have all given the names to the sword. In this place called Glastonbury, the sword is well known. It is Excalibur, with a personality of its own and a master of its own. Cannot be destroyed, but it's stuck in the rock. As the legend has it, the only one who can pull it out of the rock is the one who is destined to, with the energy and a little magic. And in that individual comes, walking to the middle slowly. The spotlight moves for a moment as the individual walks with purpose toward the rock. Those watching know the story that so many have tried and failed. The name of the individual in this particular scenario, not man, not woman, is the human being. A sub-name would be humanity, if you wish. This civilization, number 5, if you wish. And the human steps up to the platform and looks at the sword. And the human smiles. There's not a drop of sweat. For the human knows that the sword is going to come free. Because you know, the human has figured it out. The human has some magic. The human actually has a wizard. The human has figured it out. The wizard is called 23 pairs of chromosomes. The superhuman wizard is the human being today with the DNA of the Pleiadian. The wizard is the Pleiadian inside you. You have their biology. There are those on this planet would accuse you and your belief system. You're all ETs, they say. You're all from somewhere else, they say. All of humanity are ETs, dear ones. Every single one of you with 23 visible chromosomes. You're all from the stars, but so many of you don't know it. And with the acknowledgement of the wizard is the acknowledgement of the creation of the wizard. You have the higher self. Call it whatever you want to. That's the magic. God inside. That which the Pleiadian gave to you, the human being grasps the sword and pulls it out of the stone. You would expect an uproar from the ones that are watching, but there's not a sound. You see, dear ones, there's no sound in space. They are the constellations, the galaxies, the stars, the planets. And when you pulled that sword out in 2012, all of them knew it. All of them did. And then you sang a song as you held the sword up high. And some of the songs were, oh, yo, and some were not. That's why you're here. This is the hero's journey completed, dear ones. And it's not the end of humanity. It's not the end of the story. It's the completion of the first part. The battle over the darkness is one that you have now begun in earnest with light you didn't have before, with a wizard you didn't realize you had before. And with your comrades, you will prevail. Just like the ones before you did, in other planets, in other times. You may say, well, that's a bit over-dramatic, Cryon. Really? Take a look at the legends here and examine them. Take a look at these heroes' journeys and examine them. There's all the romance, there's all the victory, the profundity, the elegance that is yours. The name of the sword, known by so many differently, peace on earth. The city on the hill, the New Jerusalem. The sword has many names, and they're all beautiful, and they all represent what you're doing right now. The sword starts to glisten and shine in the light as the human takes it and walks out of the stadium, ready to battle the darkness and win. This is the end of this choir, but it's not the end of the journey. Every single one of you is that human being who pulled the sword out. I want you to hold this in your mind, in your memory, in your visualization of who you are and who the wizard is and where you came from. And so it is.